Thank you for being here. At Her Revenge, we share real voices and quiet power stories, where dignity, wisdom, and patience speak louder than shouting. If this story moved you or reminded you of something you've lived through, hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. We read every word. And sometimes, healing starts with just knowing someone else understands. Charlotte Granger had been with Channel 17 for 12 years. She didn't chase headlines or stand beneath studio lights. Her world existed 2 floors below ground in the archives, surrounded by shelves of old tapes, dusty film reels, and decades of broadcasting history. She could recall which shelf held the footage from the 1983 flood relief telethon or where the original license for the station's jingle was filed. She was the memory of the place, quiet, steady, essential. So when the invitation came for an all-staff meeting in the newly renovated boardroom upstairs, she had a feeling something was about to change. The email had come late Friday, marked mandatory, no subject line, just a calendar block titled Vision 2023. She arrived early Monday morning, clutching her leather notebook and a black pen with silver trim. The boardroom had been redesigned in glass and chrome, sleek, modern, cold. Gone was the big wooden table. In its place, white chairs, a ceiling-mounted projector, and an espresso bar that hissed every few minutes like it was trying to clear its throat. Most of the younger team was already there, fresh faces from marketing, digital production, IT. They whispered across the table, half curious, half distracted. A few glanced at Charlotte. She entered, polite but indifferent. At precisely 9:00 a.m., Marcus Glenn strode in, tablet in hand. Blazer unbuttoned, energy turned to 11. Marcus had joined the station a month earlier as the new executive director. 30, maybe 31. He came from a startup in Austin and talked a lot about modernizing legacy workflows. No one quite knew what that meant, but he'd already installed digital clocks in the hallways and changed the mission statement on the website. "Thank you all for being here," he said, with a wide smile. "Today I want to walk you through the new vision for Channel 17. Charlotte lowered her eyes, pen ready. "We're moving everything into the cloud," Marcus continued. "No more analog storage, no more physical paperwork. Full digitization, automated indexing, AI tagging, instant access. That includes the archives." He looked at Charlotte. "Directly. Roles like traditional content preservation will soon be obsolete." Silence fell. Even the espresso machine seemed to stop. One of the newer producers leaned forward, hesitating. "Does that mean—" Charlotte's position, Marcus gave a tight, practiced smile. "Charlotte will help us during the transition, of course. But moving forward, we'll be relying on systems, not individuals. Let's be honest, no one is irreplaceable." There it was. Charlotte felt the words land heavy but familiar. She didn't argue. She didn't flinch. She simply opened her notebook and wrote one quiet sentence across the page. "They think no one is irreplaceable. Time will prove otherwise." Then she closed the notebook, folded her hands, and waited for the meeting to end. By Wednesday, the buzz around the new vision had settled into something quieter, something more dangerous: acceptance. The IT department had already started moving files to the new cloud server. The archives team, what remained of it, was told to prepare physical assets for disposal or digitization. Charlotte received an email from a junior project manager named Caleb, asking if she could compile a list of everything that could be shredded by month's end. The subject line, Urgent Paperwork Reduction Initiative. She didn't reply. Instead, she walked the long hallway to the basement, past the break room and the old edit bays, into the cold, fluorescent-lit rows of shelves she knew better than her own living room. She paused by shelf 9B, black cases with masking tape labels, handwritten in faded marker: Veterans Interviews, 1969, 1972. She reached out, fingers tracing the name of one interviewee, Harold C. Ellis. He'd cried on camera while describing the moment he arrived home from Vietnam to an empty platform. The footage was grainy, but his voice had always been crystal clear. That voice had helped raise money for Veterans Services 5 years ago when Charlotte suggested airing it again for a special segment. The system they were building wouldn't know Harold Ellis mattered. It wouldn't care. Footsteps broke her thoughts. She turned to see Eleanor Fields, Ellen, to most a former segment producer, now reassigned to heritage compliance. She was in her early 60s, wore navy cardigans like armor, and walked like someone used to being ignored. I thought I'd find you down here, Ellen said, voice low. Charlotte offered a polite nod. Need something? Ellen looked around, then stepped closer. Off the record, there's a meeting on Friday. Leadership only. Marcus is presenting a final timeline. End of quarter layoffs. Charlotte stayed still. You're on the list, Charlotte. There it was, quiet, flat, delivered like a weather report. They're keeping you just long enough to clean house, Ellen continued. Then you're gone. Severance, a handshake, and maybe a thank you email signed by someone who's never stepped foot down here. Charlotte let out a soft breath. Did he say that directly? Ellen shook her head. No one says things directly anymore. But I've been through 5 transitions. I know the code. Charlotte looked back at the shelves. So many names, so many voices. I appreciate the warning, she said. Ellen hesitated. You've done more for this place than most people upstairs even know. Don't let them pretend otherwise. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, the system won't save them when it fails. That made Charlotte turn. What do you mean? Ellen shrugged, already backing away. Ask them about the metadata loss from 2014. They never fixed it. Just buried it under prettier dashboards. With that, she disappeared down the hallway, her shoes clicking softly on the linoleum floor. Charlotte stood in silence for a long time, listening to the hum of the lights and the distant echo of her own breath. Then she pulled out her notebook and added a second line beneath her first, the system will fail. The question is when. And unlike the leadership upstairs, she had no intention of being caught unprepared. The Friday meeting wasn't technically mandatory, but attendance was expected. That was how Marcus phrased things, not with rules, but with assumptions. Charlotte arrived early and took a seat near the back, notebook closed, hands folded. The room filled quickly, louder than usual. There were pastries on the side table, always a sign that bad news was coming. A few people joked quietly, others whispered, casting occasional glances her way. She noticed. And she didn't miss the way Caleb, the young project manager, slid into the seat beside Marcus, like a favored son. At 9:03, Marcus stood and tapped the edge of the whiteboard with his pen. The room stilled. Thanks for coming, everyone. I know these changes haven't been easy, but they are necessary. And I want to take a moment to recognize how far we've come. He smiled, clicked a remote, and the screen behind him lit up with a PowerPoint titled Phase 3 Full Migration. By the end of this quarter, Marcus continued, we'll be operating entirely in the cloud. Legacy materials will be digitized, indexed, and frankly liberated from our dependency on analog systems and undocumented workflows. Undocumented. Charlotte felt her jaw tighten slightly. Marcus clicked again. A new slide appeared, a simplified diagram of the station's new data flow. At the bottom right corner was a label in pale gray, Archive Management External Vendor TBD. It was small. Most people probably didn't even notice. But Charlotte did. I want to also acknowledge Caleb, Marcus said, gesturing toward the young man beside him. He's been instrumental in designing this transition. Starting next week, he'll be leading our digital asset management process, shadowing any remaining legacy procedures, and ensuring continuity where necessary. He didn't say Charlotte's name, not once, but his eyes flicked to her for a moment, just enough to register the message. She was done. There was a smattering of polite applause, and Caleb looked vaguely embarrassed, but not enough to say anything. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, filled with acronyms and software updates, but Charlotte barely heard it. She sat frozen, her notebook still closed in front of her. When the meeting ended, people shuffled out in clumps. A few co-workers offered quick smiles or sympathetic nods, but no one said anything meaningful. Caleb lingered at the edge of the room, clearly wanting to say something, but then turned and left, with Marcus instead. Charlotte stayed seated until the room emptied. Only then did she open her notebook and write, "They clapped as he erased me. I hope they remember that sound." She stood, walked to the pastry table, and took the last glazed donut. She didn't even like donuts, but somehow leaving it there felt like giving up too soon. Back at her desk, her inbox was already updated. A calendar invite appeared titled, Knowledge Transfer Session Archive Procedures. Attendees Charlotte Granger, Caleb Jennings. Organizer Marcus Glenn. She clicked Accept. Then she opened a private folder on her desktop labeled Bunker. Inside were scanned contracts, handwritten inventory logs, licensing agreements with time-locked renewals. and one particularly important spreadsheet labeled Metadata Gaps Last Known Fixes. No one had asked about these. No one knew they were there. But when the system inevitably buckled, when the pretty dashboard stopped spinning, someone would come looking, and Charlotte would be ready. The notice came via internal memo printed and taped of all places to the vending machine near the basement stairwell. Notice archive room to undergo cleansing and conversion week of June 5th. Please remove all non-essential materials prior to contractor arrival. Contact Caleb Jennings with questions. Cleansing. Like the archives were some kind of infection, Charlotte read the notice twice, then carefully peeled it from the glass, folded it, and slid it into her notebook. The countdown had begun. She knew what came next: unsupervised interns, mislabeled boxes, history tossed into recycling bins by people who didn't know what 3,4-U-matic meant. This was how institutions lost their soul, not through malice, but through ignorance in a hurry. That evening, Charlotte stayed late. By 7:15, the building was mostly dark, humming with the low rhythm of sleeping machines. She made her way back downstairs, flipping the master switch in the archive room, bathing the shelves in flickering fluorescent light. She'd already taken precautions. Over the past few weeks, she'd created duplicate logs, clean versions for Caleb and the transition team, and a separate set for herself. She'd flagged the assets she knew wouldn't survive digitization: rare local interviews, obscure public domain collections, unaired footage with unscanned signatures. Then one by one, she began removing them. She didn't steal, she preserved. Each night that week, Charlotte loaded her small rolling suitcase with 5 to 6 tapes or folders, no more. Enough to go unnoticed. She stored them in her apartment closet in airtight containers, labeling them by instinct. Midwestern Civil Rights, 1964-1968. Local jazz sessions, beta tapes, donor footage unreleased. She knew she couldn't save everything, but she didn't have to. She only needed to keep what mattered most. The pieces no one else understood, the ones that would become critical when the digital copies inevitably failed to render, or when metadata couldn't match context. On Thursday afternoon, Caleb finally approached her. "Hey Charlotte," he said, notebook in hand. "Just wanted to check in on the cleansing prep." "You've got eyes on what can go right," Charlotte looked up from her desk, calm. "I've categorized the obsolete reels and marked them with orange tape," she said. "Those can be reviewed next week. The others need special handling." Caleb blinked. Okay. Special as in, some require redigitization with corrected codecs," she added smoothly. "Others contain donor restrictions that could expose the station to legal risk if deleted." He nodded clearly out of his depth and scribbled something down. "Cool. Yeah, just let me know what to flag. We don't want legal issues. Marcus is big on compliance." She smiled almost kindly. "Of course. I'll have a summary ready Monday." When he left, she turned back to her private spreadsheet and typed one more label: "Caleb doesn't know what he doesn't know." That night, as she rolled her suitcase out past security, the guard at the front desk, Thomas, who'd worked there longer than Marcus had been alive, gave her a curious look. Burning the midnight oil again, Miss Granger, Charlotte offered a quiet smile. "Just saving what's worth saving." The first sign came in the form of an email with the subject line, "Urgent Playback Failure City Council Broadcast, 1978. Charlotte opened it with a detached curiosity. The message was from one of the station's weekend techs copied to Caleb and 2 others she didn't recognize, unable to retrieve full video from Archive Cloud. Metadata loads, but footage cuts at 1:42. Confirmed glitch on both public and internal servers. Need legacy access ASAP, airing scheduled for Saturday night. There it was. Charlotte leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and waited. Within hours, 3 more emails followed: missing real IDs for regional agriculture footage, 1982-85. Digitized newsreel plays audio from wrong year. Corrupted donor video, nameplate, mismatch. Each time Charlotte said nothing. She wasn't petty, she wasn't sabotaging anything. She had trained Caleb. She had labeled what could be salvaged. She had submitted the clean archive report, curated, streamlined, and sanitized just like they wanted. But she had also kept the real records, quietly, securely. And now, as the system stumbled over its own illusions of efficiency, Charlotte sat with a cup of chamomile tea and let the silence grow deeper. That night, well past midnight, her phone buzzed. Caller ID Ellen Fields. She answered on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call. It's happening, Ellen said, voice low. The servers stalled during the evening news rebroadcast. Marcus tried to pull back up from the cloud and nothing. It's like we digitized air. Charlotte sipped her tea. What did Caleb say that the files were intact? That it must be a technical glitch. He looks like he aged 10 years in 2 hours. I almost feel bad for him. Charlotte was quiet for a beat, and Marcus Ellen laughed bitter and short. He locked himself in the executive suite and asked IT to send him screenshots of what went wrong. He has no idea what's missing because he never knew what we had. Charlotte walked to her closet and opened the air-sealed containers stacked in neat rows. She pulled out the Harold C. Ellis tape, held it in her hands. They'll come calling, she said softly. Ellen didn't respond right away. Then will you help them? Charlotte turned the tape over in her fingers, remembering the tremble in Harold's voice, the way the camera stayed still even as he cried. She remembered why it mattered. I don't know yet, she said. Depends on who asks. And how? The next morning, a formal summons landed in her inbox. Subject Executive Request Archive Restoration Meeting Time. 10:00 a.m. Attendees. Marcus Glenn, Caleb Jennings. IT Director, Charlotte Granger. No please, no thank you. Just expectation. She arrived 5 minutes early. Marcus looked rough tie-loosened laptop screen, still on the same frozen loading bar. Caleb offered a weak smile, then looked down quickly. The IT director, a woman named Rosanna she'd never worked with before, spoke first. Charlotte, thanks for coming. We've hit a serious snag with the archive system. It seems some of the foundational records weren't transferred cleanly. Marcus jumped in. What she means is, we're experiencing gaps. And we need your help locating the originals. Charlotte met his eyes. Gaps. Yes, he said too quickly. Not your fault, of course. Probably just a miscommunication during the transition. Totally normal. We just need access to whatever backups you might have. Offhand. Charlotte leaned forward. I'll help, she said. But first I have a few requests. Marcus blinked. Requests? Charlotte didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Yes, she said calmly. Not demands, just conditions for collaboration. Caleb shifted in his seat, but said nothing. The IT director, Rosanna, leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Marcus tried to recover. We're all on the same team here, Charlotte. No need for formalities. We just need access to the legacy assets so we can get the system back up. And I'm willing to help, Charlotte said. But only if we're clear on how we got here. Rosanna spoke carefully. What exactly are you suggesting? Charlotte opened her notebook and slid it across the table. It was turned to a page titled Unresolved Archive Risks Pre-Migration Summary, dated 6 weeks earlier. Signed only by her. Before the transition, she continued, I submitted this to Caleb. It outlined every metadata gap, analog inconsistency, and donor-restricted item. None of it was reflected in the final asset list. Caleb's face flushed. I thought the AI was going to handle. Charlotte held up a hand. You were given responsibility without understanding context. That's not your fault, but it is the truth. She turned to Marcus. And you, sir, stood in a room full of professionals and said on record, no one is irreplaceable. Marcus sat back, jaw tightening. So Charlotte said, here's what I want in return for restoring the archive. She held up one finger. First, full acknowledgement of my authorship in all restoration reports, internal and public. A second finger. Second, the reinstatement of at least one dedicated archive specialist, trained, not automated. I'll help you find someone qualified. Or train them myself. A third. And third, a written statement from you, Marcus, to the board, recognizing the consequences of transitioning without consulting legacy staff. Rosanna gave the faintest smile, like she approved. Marcus scoffed. This is extortion. No, Charlotte said gently. This is stewardship. The difference is that one destroys quietly. The other protects what matters. He looked away. There was a long silence. Then Rosanna cleared her throat. For what it's worth, I think those terms are reasonable. Caleb nodded, still flushed. Me too. Marcus glanced between them. The room had shifted, and he knew it. I'll draft the letter, he muttered. Good, Charlotte replied. She stood. Then I'll begin preparing the recovery protocols. but I'll need access to the backup tapes in my custody. Marcus blinked again. Wait, you took physical copies? Charlotte smiled just a little. I preserved them, she said. Because I knew exactly what would happen. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, and for once, she didn't look away. That afternoon, Charlotte returned to the station with a rolling suitcase and 3 numbered containers. Thomas, the security guard, gave her a knowing nod. She passed the news studio where the teleprompter was stuck mid-script. Past the editing bay, where 2 producers were arguing over a missing interview segment. Past the server room, where Rosanna was quietly rewriting recovery protocols. And into the archive room, still dusty, still hers. As she began to unpack the real memory of the station, she wrote one final line in her notebook. They thought I was just a number. But I was the index. 2 weeks later, Channel 17 aired a special segment to celebrate the station's 70th anniversary. It was a modest production by modern standards, just a 30-minute broadcast of archival footage and voiceovers, but it carried the unmistakable weight of memory. Charlotte sat at home on her worn but comfortable couch, a mug of tea in hand as the broadcast opened, with the voice of Harold C. Ellis clean, clear, and unmistakably present. Coming home was quieter than I imagined, the voice said, overlaying grainy black and white footage of a train platform empty but for one waving flag. Charlotte smiled. Every clip had been recovered, every nameplate corrected, every donor condition respected. It was far from perfect, but it was honest. And more importantly, it worked. She hadn't returned to her old position. That part was gone, and she'd accepted it. But after restoring the archive and training a new full-time specialist, someone she had handpicked, a librarian from Cleveland with a passion for public broadcasting, Charlotte had declined Marcus's offer to stay on as heritage consultant. You don't need me to watch over the system, she'd told him. You just need to stop pretending it can replace what it never learned to value. To his credit, Marcus didn't argue. He shook her hand and said, For what it's worth, you taught me more about institutional memory than a dozen consultants ever could. She had nodded. Just try not to forget it. The board had received her report and acknowledged it with a formal letter of thanks, which included the rare phrase essential to operational recovery. Rosanna had followed up with an email of her own. If you ever want to rebuild a public archive the right way, call me. Even Caleb had changed. He'd taken her old notebook, the parts she'd allowed him to keep, and started building his own version. Less tidy, but eager. Humble. And now, as Harold Ellis's voice faded into a vintage jazz cue from 1973, Charlotte saw her own name appear at the bottom of the screen. Archival Restoration Consultant, Charlotte Granger. With deep gratitude for her 12 years of service. She didn't cry, but she did take a slow breath that felt like the first in a very long time. The following morning, Charlotte walked to the public library. Not because she needed books, but because it was quiet, solid, and smelled faintly of binding glue and old paper. She sat at a corner table, opened a fresh notebook, and began to write. Some lessons don't make the training manual, she scribbled. Some systems only work because someone invisible kept them working. She thought about all the places where knowledge had once lived in people, not dashboards, not search fields, people. People who remembered how the filing system shifted in 1987. People who knew which donor had called twice about music clearance. People who weren't data points, but stories themselves. She looked out the window. Spring was arriving slowly, like it always did in Ohio, reluctant but inevitable. And maybe that's what she had become too, inevitable. Not because she couldn't be replaced, but because she had made herself unforgettable. Back at Channel 17, a new intern asked the freshly trained archive specialist where the footage for the 1981 tornado coverage had come from. The specialist smiled and pointed to a thin black label on the hard drive. Recovered by C. Granger, source original tape. Clean 2023, do not discard. Ever. The end.